Michael Clarke is Professor of Defense Studies and Sky News military analyst. Welcome to our program, Professor Clarke.
Hello, it's nice to be with you.
Head of the British Army Admiral Sir Tony Radakin has warned that the world is on the brink of the third nuclear age. Is he right, and is the United Kingdom and NATO ready to enter this new nuclear age, as Russia has developed its own hypersonic intercontinental missiles?
Well, what he means by the third nuclear age is that we had the first nuclear age was the development of many nuclear weapons and different sorts. And the second nuclear age was an age of arms control, of restrictions and predictability, where we could live with it. And in reality, the nuclear balance between Russia and the United States hasn't changed significantly since the 1970s. So we've lived for 50 years now with the same technological balance between the superpowers and also in relation to European security. And the third nuclear age, as he puts it, is an age in which arms control has now disappeared and we're in a more unpredictable world. Technologically, the weapons aren't that different. There are variations on them, of course, and hypersonic missiles and more precise missiles are part of the picture. But what makes this the third age is not so much the technologies, but the fact that those technologies now exist in a world of less restraint. And as we've seen in the reckless rhetoric, as it's expressed by President Putin, who constantly talks about nuclear weapons, and he's the only one who talks about them. In the West, we don't talk very much about nuclear weapons. We certainly don't threaten them. We certainly don't conduct nuclear drills just to impress the Kremlin, but they do it all the time. And so Putin's own political weakness leads him constantly to threaten, by implication, nuclear war, when the reality is no different than it ever was. But it's this lack of restraint, the lack of arms control, that makes this the third nuclear age, and therefore a more dangerous age in which we are now embarked.
The British Army would be destroyed in 6 months to a year if it had the fight to fight Russia. The British veteran ministers has warned. What is your reaction to this interesting statement?
Well, Al Cairns made that statement this week. And he was referring to the lack of sustainability, and he's absolutely right. I mean, he's only saying what independent analysts have been saying now for some years. What is different is that he is a government minister, and he's saying it, because normally people like me would say it, and the government would issue a reassuring statement to say that they review it all the time and so on. But now the government, and this government is a great deal more straightforward and I think honest about the state of our defences than previous governments have been. And we know that our army is quite small. It is well equipped. It is very well trained. It has some of the best equipment in the world, but we have small numbers of everything, and our own stockpiles of ammunition and our stockpiles of necessary equipment and spares is now very, very low. And so it isn't just the army, but the Air Force and the Navy, even though they would perform very well in combat, would run out of ammunition in some cases within a few days. And so what he was saying is really not about the quality of the army, but about the problem of sustainability. And this government is committed to addressing that problem and doing something about sustainability in a big way. But how long it will take to build up ammunition stocks and spares is a difficult question. And the fact is we've let it go very low because we never expected to be in a war scenario. We've been good at operating. We can operate in the Red Sea, we can operate in Iraq and Afghanistan, we can operate in places like for training purposes in Canada and Kenya, we can operate in East Timor, we can operate in Sierra Leone in Africa. The British forces are very good at doing things they're given to do. But operating and being prepared for a major war are two different things. And we have spent too many years assuming that the possibility of major war was 10 years away, always 10 years away. And now we find, of course, and you know better than anybody else in Europe, that major war is very close to us, and in your case is with you now. And so the transition in British thinking, official thinking, is between a military that is adequate to the operational tasks it is given, as opposed to a military that could sustain a potentially longer war. And we're certainly not ready for that at the moment, and we've got to get ready to sustain a longer war in order to deter it. Only by being prepared to fight a longer war can you deter the prospects of a war, and that's where we are at the moment.
Vladimir Putin has fired intercontinental ballistic missile on Ukraine for the first time in response to the Western decision to allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia. What is your reaction and what is your take on NATO's vulnerability to such air threats? And does NATO have a military advantage over Russia in intercepting such missiles?
Yeah, the missile that he used, it wasn't actually an intercontinental ballistic missile. It was a medium-range ballistic missile, but the range wasn't important. I mean, what was intended was to show that missile could have reached every European capital, so it was easily capable of reaching London or Paris or Berlin. And the other thing about the missile that he wanted us to notice is that it was a MIRV, a multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicle, so a multiple warhead. And it fell in different ways. Different warheads fell onto the target. And what he was showing is that their strategic nuclear forces, which are designed basically for retaliation against the United States, that those forces could be used in principle for more limited strikes, conventional or nuclear, on European targets. That was the message. That message was received but didn't make a lot of difference to European thinking because it was regarded as a typical example of Putin making threats. And he can keep on threatening, but it won't make any difference to the way officials, certainly in Britain, and analysts in Britain like myself, think about the nature of this war. Of course this war is dangerous to the rest of us in Europe, but that's been the case since this phase of the war began. It began in 2014, as we know. But in 2022, when Putin crossed a real red line, a Rubicon, and tried to suppress the whole of, conquer the whole of Ukraine, I think we all realized that we were in a different situation. And this conflict was always going to get more dangerous for the rest of us in Europe, as indeed is the case. And it will get more dangerous still before we've reconciled it in some way. So that particular use of the missile that he chose was a very clear message, which has been clearly received, and we're not taking very much notice of it.
So you see this move, Putin's move, as another element of Russian bluff and bluster?
Yes, I think it's absolutely an element of Russian bluster. If the Russians really think that they would use ballistic missiles to bomb European targets, then they will come up against NATO. 32 members of NATO with an income which is 20 times greater than that of Russia. 32 nations with a nuclear deterrent, not just in the United States, but in Britain and France as well. If they really want to attack NATO, then even Putin must know that he will lose. So I don't think there's very much chance of that happening. NATO has all sorts of problems, and the Russians are trying to undermine NATO in every way they can possibly think of. But using a ballistic missile to attack a target, a city inside a NATO country is almost unthinkably stupid, because NATO would retaliate.
According to the New York Times, General Gerasimov has had a phone conversation with General Charles Brown, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. And Gerasimov told Brown that the Oreshnik missile launch had been planned long before the Biden administration agreed to allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia. Why does General Gerasimov contradict Vladimir Putin? Because Putin says that it was a response to the Western decision to strike deep inside Russia. And don't you think that Gerasimov just downplays Putin's threats?
Yes, I mean, I think Gerasimov was trying as a military professional to reassure his counterpart in the United States. And that's what they do all the time. They try to create predictability. I don't think anyone believes Gerasimov, because this undoubtedly was a Putin decision to do something that would shake the consensus within NATO, and it hasn't done that at all. But I'm not surprised that Gerasimov said that. He can try and downplay the Putin message, but the Putin message is what it was, and it's what military professionals do all the time. They try to reassure each other so that there will not be a mistake, and that's not unreasonable. But in this case, it didn't make any difference, I don't think.